Welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. Today's topic, it's a cool one. It is how to use chatbots to create sustainable revenue. A lot of talk about chatbots. We've been talking about chatbots for a few years now. I think there's a lot of confusion about, how to develop the best chatbot strategy for your sales org. Should I implement it? And so today we're going to run through some examples of effective sales chatbots and how you can actually create your own, the first steps, the ROI you can expect. We're all trying to do revenue driving activities. So we're going to run through that. And then lastly, I think it's an important thing to touch on is how can we do all of this without losing our human touch and the personalization and the humanization. And so before I introduce my awesome guest that I have with me today, a few housekeeping matters. So number one, this will be recorded. So if you got to jump off, you want to share it out with a colleague or whatever, we've got your back. We're going to send it out as soon as we wrap up today. And number two, this is the Sales Hacker webinar. So we want us to be engaging. This is all about the community getting involved. So make sure that you jump on the Q&A if you want anything clarified, if you're thinking about chatbots, if you have any questions, let us know. We'll try and weave relevant questions throughout. And then if we don't get to it, don't worry, we'll try and answer the rest in a little Q&A wrap up at the end. But now that we have that out of the way, I want to introduce my awesome guest. I've got Brian Kotlyar. Am I pronouncing that right?
Pretty close, Kotlyar, but just
Kotlyar.
about.
Okay. Brian Kotlyar, who is the head of demand generation and growth at Intercom. So Brian, welcome, man.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, definitely excited to pick your brain. If we're talking about chatbots, there's not really a better person to talk to than you. And I'll give the community just a little more color on your background. So we were chatting before this. So head of demand gen and growth at Intercom. Intercom, for those who don't know, is a customer messaging platform that drives faster growth through better relationships with your prospects and customers. And prior to this role, you actually led global demand gen for Sprinkler, which is a massive organization, where you helped that company scale from 90 employees all the way up to 1,200. And from a $50 million valuation to $1.8 billion. That must have been a crazy ride, to say the least.
Yes, indeed. Quite a journey we went through over those few short years of hypergrowth. Yeah,
I bet. And then when you're not helping, grow SaaS companies, you are an avid basketball fan. You were saying a news junkie and a cook as well. News junkie, where's your source of news? I'm always like, I don't know where to turn for news these days. What are your sources?
I think I've actually recently kind of started to get more old school instead of digital. So I've been starting getting physical papers delivered again, which has been a nice kind of like weekend ritual for me. Is I actually hold a Wall Street Journal in my hands and think, first, wow, what like an obsolete medium, but then also really appreciate sort of the forced concentration you get from sitting there and reading it. So I get my New York Times and my Wall Street Journal every weekend. And then, of course, I kind of cheat during the week by looking at, a whole host of news apps and things like that. But I really do think to sort of sitting there quietly and just reading a physical thing for a couple hours each week.
I agree. Totally. I just made the switch from, I usually always got real books and I would always read those. And I just switched to my iPad now and I don't know, I'm not sold. The only reason I like it is because I can highlight stuff and have notes there. But anyway, we digress. Let's talk about chatbots. Let's dive into it. We got about 55 minutes to break this down. So let's dive right into it. You wanna kick us off?
Yeah, that sounds great. And I think that we've probably not have quite that much amount of sort of slides to work through. So hopefully there'll be plenty of time for everybody to ask questions, and we can support many interesting digressions about chatbots. So
perfect.
That's me. We covered that. Roughly what the agenda is going to look like today is we're going to talk about why messaging has become so important and what's kind of sort of the macro change that is sort of elevating chatbots as being so critical. We'll talk a bit about the impact those things can have on your revenue picture and what's the ROI of embracing them. And then
Yep.
we'll kind of finish with hopefully some really actionable, simple ways to think about how to get going, because you can imagine this getting very fancy, lots of AI, natural language processing discussions, all kinds of craziness, and that's really not necessary. You can really get started very simply and start to get some benefit from your business or your business with a few key tips and a few key first steps.
Yeah.
I want to comment one other thing, which is for those of you that can stick around with us to the end for QA, we're going to send out everybody that can make it to the end a copy, a digital copy, because the physical one's not quite ready, though we'll be hopefully soon. A digital copy of our brand new sales handbook. It's a really, really, really strong piece of content that we put together with contributions from sales leaders from all across the industry, great companies, great leaders, just really good, valuable, useful sort of modern sales advice. Kind of our perspective on that, given that so much of what's in circulation sort of was written a while back before all these new digital ways of selling were really well adopted. So we'll send that out to everybody who makes it to the end with us.
Awesome. Do I get one of those too? Am I included in that? Because I haven't actually dove into this yet.
Don't hang up on me, and then I guess by definition you'll have made it to the end. You'll get a copy.
Perfect. Amazing.
All right, cool. So let's start with sort of what is sort of the macro trend that's causing messaging and then therefore chatbots to become so important. So the first thing is, this is sort of a bit of a tired point, but I want to just open with it because I think it'll help frame things, is customer communication has changed dramatically. And the reason for that is that personal human communication has changed dramatically. Sort of the idea to link to, just as sort of a grounding point, is to just imagine for yourself how you would talk to your friends or your family or a business 20 years ago. And of course, all those things are mediated essentially by physical mail and by the phone, and how dramatically digital has transformed that. And then in particular, how dramatically that's changed in just the last kind of 5 years or so. And this is sort of a slide that we put together that kind of collapses in all the various forms of messaging that currently exist, whether it's social media, text messaging, email, and kind of looking at how these things sort of now compare to one another. And you can kind of see that the messaging applications, things like Facebook, WhatsApp, etc., are sort of, in a lot of ways, they're sort of devouring personal human communications. So if we can kind of wrap our mind around that, which I think is fairly well understood, I think the thing to kind of ask yourself, which is what is, I think, a very profound realization, is kind of, and Scott, I'd love your opinion on this, is when was the last time you actually had a text message conversation with a business, or a messaging-based conversation with a business? And does that happen to you as frequently as it does when you speak to friends or family or other people?
Definitely does not happen as frequently. Trying to think. The last one was actually, I was trying to get my cell phone bill fixed something on my cell phone bill, and they told me they had this Facebook chat thing, and I went and I started chatting with them on Facebook, and it was good. It was really instant, but then I found out they actually couldn't help me in what I wanted to do. But at least I got that line of communication quickly, because typically when you call your phone provider, it's like, you're on hold for like an hour or whatever. So that would be the last one, but definitely not as much as today alone. I probably had 6 different WhatsApp conversations and, 5 different texts, and I'm on, Slack and whatnot. So there's
your story and your experience is like the perfect anecdote to explain kind of why we're so passionate about this, which is, first of all, it's apparent just in all of our lives how massively different and how much messaging now dominates all of our personal communications, and how it's slowly starting to enter into our business ones, first sort of as a collaboration technology with Slack or Skype or whatever, and then now more and more into sort of support and commercial interactions with other people.
Totally.
And sort of right there in your comment, you indicated how excited you were when you had the opportunity to message somebody, because it was fast, it was instant, it was right there.
Yeah.
So that speaks to this next slide I wanted to share, which is that basically every single person in every single context would prefer to message with the business than talk to them over email, physical mail, or the phone. It's basically impossible to find a human being walking the streets of San Francisco or any city in the world holding a digital device who says to them, what I'd really love to do? I'd love to call a call center. I'd actually pick out old music and talking you into an IVR system and God knows what. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's not a behavior that is going to persist for very long, if at all.
Yeah. I don't even have to call, you don't even have to call the pizza place to get a pizza delivered anymore. You can use DoorDash or Foodora or whatever, and it's just a little message away and it's done.
So business interactions naturally need to move out of sort of these outmoded ways of doing things and sort of adapt to how people actually want to communicate. And that's just evident in what people prefer. And then the last bit is sort of what you said, though. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses have kind of stepped a little way into chatbots, but haven't actually done or chat in general, and haven't done a very good job. So still, a lot of these conversations, they sort of narrowly endpoint in, oh, call me anyway. And so
that totally was what it was.
You get 80% of the way there, and then you're like, oh, well, I guess I should have just called the 1-800 number to begin with. And so that's one of the things that we're starting to see with, obviously I work here at Intercom, so I'll use a lot of Intercom examples, but that's really what we're starting to see, that this massive change is that the technology around chatbots and messaging is getting useful enough that now we don't have to have that experience that you did, where you get all excited, you think you're going to do this the right way, and then it kind of just crashes and burns at the end.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. So that kind of gets to this question, I think, that's highly relevant for a sales audience, which is that, your marketing team or whoever has built a website, the whole purpose of the website is to explain your services, explain your capabilities, cause people to get interest, cause people to engage you, and then yet all those things endpoint in a form, by and large. And the problem with forms is not so much that in and of themselves they're evil or bad, though Intercom, as an example, is a company that has fully embraced messaging and chat. We use forms all the time because there's all kinds of scenarios and situations where they're the right tool for the job. The problem is that for the tool, the tool of actually talking to people, forms are a very, very poor mechanism. It takes days to go from filling in a form to actually having a conversation with somebody. And in that time, all the urgency, all the interest to actually have that conversation goes away.
Unbelievably critical moments, those first few moments. I used to run a large business development team, and if we didn't get to certain types of leads, like a demo request, for example, we didn't get to it in about 5-10 minutes, we saw it drop off dramatically. Like, I think the going number is about 70% drop off in likelihood that they'll convert to opportunities if you're past that 10-minute window.
And as a sales leader, there's like nothing more infuriating than going through your your SDRs like logs for the day, or your sales team's logs for the day, and you see all these demo requests come through, and the SDR got back to them, sure, but then it's just they're like, hey, you said you want a demo, do you want to talk? And then a follow up 2 days later, and a follow up goes out 2 days later, and a follow up goes out 2 days later, and it's just silence. And you're trying to wrap your mind around, this person did all the work of asking me to talk to them. Now all we're doing is trying to actually do that, and nothing good ever comes of it. It's so infuriating and so frustrating. And so that's kind of where chat really comes in to help. And we use this visualization to kind of help really capture that idea, which is, in a traditional scenario, you have all these key steps you have to go through, and each of them takes time and is sort of a very structured individual process moment that's a combination of systems and people. In the live chat context, what you can do is you basically take the whole front part of that and you slam it down into one step, and that step happens really quickly. It essentially takes what usually takes 2+ days through an SDR cadence, and you essentially collapse that into what is often a matter of minutes. And then what's most exciting is put a bot in there that can drop from minutes to seconds. The resolution times and the speed of response just are totally transformed. So if you want to kind of wrap your mind around what's the opportunity of first chat in general and secondarily bots, it's really like this is basically the story, where we can take all these things that currently are human driven and take a long time and have attrition, constant attrition like we were just talking about, and remove all that attrition and just get to a resolution, for good or bad, because there's nothing wrong with the sales conversation that you end up choosing not to have or disqualify. But let's just end the conversation and move on to something else, for good or bad, as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I love that. And that's something I kind of often hear when I'm talking about chatbots and with colleagues and people. A lot of times, like, okay, great, but like they would have filled out a form anyway. So like, why do I need this other layer of complexity? And maybe they would have, but like you're saying here, it allows you to shrink that time to an SQL, which speed is everything in the world we live in now. And if you're able to shrink that, you're shortening your overall deal cycle dramatically.
Totally. There's also some other benefits, which I'll share in a moment when we get to the ROI slides. There's some other interesting, cool things that happen when you embrace this. And first of all, the time savings alone and the efficiency is meaningful. And then there's some other incremental benefits as well, which I'll share in just a second. Awesome. But kind of to your point here, when we look at this slide, essentially what we're talking about is that when you respond within 5 minutes, kind of just what you said, so I won't repeat it too much, is that you see a 9x increase in conversations that you get to have. And I want to give our sales team here at Intercom, every job I've ever had as a marketer, I want to give our sales team as many at-bats as possible to sell and be successful. And then you just see that ratio completely collapse after just a couple of minutes. So that phenomenon that was that we all are aware of from the form-based world, where first response time to a hand raiser in a form makes all the difference in the world, that same phenomenon exists in chat. And so that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Just putting chat on the website won't solve the problem. You actually have to talk to these people to get and reach that first response time in the chat window. Because again, kind of to your point about how many businesses have embraced messaging and chat, but haven't actually deployed it super well. It's often the case that you'll go to a forum, you'll go to a chat window, whether it's Intercom's or somebody else's, and you say, hey, I have a question about your pricing for 500 seats. And then it's just like silence for minutes, hours go by. And so that person bounces and goes to a competitor's site and asks that same question. So that same phenomenon of first response time that comes with the demo request also has to be managed in the context of chat. So my point is to say that the technology alone, just putting the window there, doesn't actually solve all the business problems.
Right. Yeah.
So then, okay, so what are we going to do? And the answer is basically Gartner has some research, there's lots of this floating around, which is we have to find a way to actually interact with all those people that are. So we all agree chat's better. We all agree that if people show up there and ask a question, we have to get to them quickly. But that's really, really hard to do. And so basically the answer is chatbots. That's where these things come in. It allows us to scale up the speed and frequency of engagement with those people that are coming to ask us questions or engage with us without necessarily having to staff a 24/7 call center with all these people and all these different skills and trainings, which is just not feasible, even for a large business. We can't have a human being sitting there and engage with every single person that shows up and figure out what they need and address their problem. And so that's where really, like, just at a macro level, again, we're all pretty much, I believe, going to end up with chat in some form, sitting on our websites and in our business. And we're all pretty much going to end up with bots helping us because it just doesn't scale well to find a way to get human beings in there. You just cannot hit the first response times. You're not going to be on a 5-minute window consistently without help.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And Brian, let's quickly jump to our community. We got a good question here that I would love to get and we may get to it later, but it's a good one. So Tom, thank you so much for your question. And are you saying that less information needs to be captured because bots are better at directing the conversation than, say, like a form through the right qualifying questions?
I would say there's a couple interesting things there. You probably, whatever, I'll just use BANT. I know it's kind of old school, but, standard, like. Yeah.
All the other acronyms are just that with the different letter anyway.
Yeah. So, like, let's just say you're a BANT shop and you need 2 of the 4 to qualify something.
Yeah.
That doesn't really change necessarily because your internal business criteria for to whom you want to sell and under what circumstances you want to sell to them kind of are what they are. But what you can do with the messenger that's really interesting is there's a way more context and you have a much richer experience you can apply in that format than you can typically with the form. Or maybe you could with the form, but it's actually really hard to implement in a form that's quite easy to do in a messenger. So I guess let's make that like simpler and less conceptual. So the messenger can be conscious of and aware of what source somebody came in through from, like an ad or whatever. It can be conscious and aware of what page they're on when it fires. It can be conscious and aware of the IP address that they're using and what is the associated business characteristics of that, or the cookie that you placed on that visitor the last time they came to your website and what they did. And so that context can get pulled into the messenger and then used in 2 ways. First, it can just dynamically change the interaction that happens there. So what bot comes up and how that bot just behaves can be affected by the information. And then also, if the conversation transitions to a human being, all that context is available to the human being when they open up their chat window to engage. So if you have an SDR or an account executive who, based on the bot interaction or some other trigger, leaps in to speak to some great target customer, they're going to see all that information that the bot also had available to them, and then they can drive the conversation accordingly. So I hope that answers the question. I don't know if it totally did, but was that helpful? Yeah,
that was super helpful. And Tom, you can let us know if you have a follow-up question there. But That makes total sense. So essentially this bot can just provide much more context behind the questions and read between the lines. Let's say I've got I'm targeting sports as an industry, and I've set up my unique landing page that has a bunch of, sports team logos on it, and they came from there back to your website. That bot would immediately know that and ask some relevant, sports related questions to help qualify.
Yeah, and so if your target vertical is sports, now you don't have to ask that question as part of the qualification process.
Totally.
So instead, ask a different question. Ask them what their title is. If the title's right, send them into the right branching of a conversation that you want to have with them.
Cool. I like it. And Tom said, that's perfect. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Tom, for the question. So quickly, as I mentioned, there's a lot of interesting ROI characteristics to embracing this technology. So I'll share a few here. So first things first. Again, I'm sort of speaking at a high level about chat and messaging, and then I'll go deeper into the bots specifically. So at a high level, we did a pretty large data study spanning tens of millions of conversations. And what we found was that visitors who chat are 82% more likely to convert to buying customers. And so now we should acknowledge, I'll just say, for all the statisticians about to jump down my throat, there's probably a little bias there. It's probably the case that people who chat were like more interested purchasers anyway. But that jump, that 82% is so great that I don't attribute all of that just to the fact that they're you're getting people that are interested in buying, they're interested in talking. I think there's something else going on here, which I think comes through also in the fact that they pay more. So what you're basically doing is you're getting more people to convert at larger dollar amounts faster. So just in general, that's the kind of the power that when you introduce chat and messaging into your sales process that you get the benefit of.
Yeah. Do you have a hypothesis on why they pay more?
Well, I think what we've done is, and this is not with the same level of rigor, but I think this stands to reason, especially as I speak to a sales community amongst us, selling helps. We get very product-oriented people who say, oh, the product will take care of that. And then that's true. I would love it I think we'd all be very happy as strategic business leaders if the product just did all the work and customized everything and sold value and solutions and all that good stuff. But those of us that have sold things, we know that's nonsense. That there's actual work in understanding what is the problem, what is the right fit for that problem, pricing it appropriately, and then packaging and selling the thing. And so what I believe is happening when you have that, and what we've seen some data on, but not quite at the same significance, is that the sellers are actually engaging with these people in this medium and then selling them a better solution.
Right.
And then that solution, of course, monetizes better for the business. Yeah.
Makes sense. Just getting a better feel for what's going on in their business and able to diagnose better.
Totally. So just sell stuff.
Yeah.
So now we kind of get to the point about, okay, where do bots sort of fit into all of this? So what we saw is, we saw those great conversion dynamics. Now let's talk about actually leads. The prior thing was actually converting to a buying customer. This is talking about leads. So when you introduce the messenger with the bot, and this is what we're talking about that speed, the fact that you can get to folks within microseconds of them starting to engage with you in the messenger, we see a 36% increase in lead conversion when people interact with your bots. And that would be versus them doing something else, like finding a form or bouncing and doing nothing. So you're going to get a lot more folks into the top of your funnel by firing off this dynamic way of engaging and being really quick to react to whatever stimulus the end user puts in using a bot. So now you're sort of dealing with the dual benefit of a better performing funnel as a benefit of adding chat and messaging, and now a better performing version of that funnel by putting bots into the mix.
Nice.
And then what happens is you get far better customer engagement. Again, I'm using Intercom examples. I'm sorry, these are the ones I've got. But the thing I wanted to share was just from one of our customers that was sort of talking about this phenomenon, is that when they added bots into their messenger, they see a 50% increase in engagement. So they're getting to people faster, so people kind of engage back to them faster. 16% more of the folks are getting through the purchase process that they want, they kind of want them to go to, or rather actually be clear, through the sort of the journey that they want people to get through. Because that journey isn't always a resolution at purchase. Sometimes it's a resolution at disqualification, or realizing that, this is a current customer, this is a support question. We're going to give them a support article instead, or something like that.
Yeah, I like it. And Brian, let's jump another one. We're getting some great questions, so I always like to go here. So we've got Anna. Anna, thank you so much for the question. Anna says, a lot of our visitors seem to find the chat a little annoying do you have any suggestions on how to optimize the chat box to be perhaps less intrusive, maybe popping up after X minutes, or but still be beneficial?
Yeah, actually, I had a little bit of content on this a bit deeper in terms of some of the tips for implementation.
Okay.
I guess I won't go too deep on it now, but I'll just comment and then we can, it was Anna, right? That was the name?
Anna, yeah.
Yeah, Anna. So if we don't answer all your questions, Anna, just make sure you ask and we'll get to deeper in the Q&A. But really simple thing to just think about is, again, the biggest thing to remember is if the messenger has context, you need to use it. It's an issue that we often see with implementation. It's like, oh, I have a new toy. I'm going to use it for everything. I'm going to put it on every page. It's going to jump in for every user. And like, of course, that's kind of naturally, you know, whatever, you buy a new car, you find yourself driving in a lot of places all of a sudden. And I think that that's kind of the instinct when you add a messenger into your mix. But the truth is that you don't actually want to, it's not the highest ROI use case to talk to every single visitor in exactly the same way. And so like the simple answer is you need to harness as much context as you can to conditionally show the messenger, whatever it can be. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing I'll acknowledge is that, yeah, it's the case. This is new. It pops up. And some of your website visitors aren't going to enjoy that form of interaction. And I think that's also something we just kind of get a little bit accustomed to because some people just want a really passive browsing experience. And what you're trying to do is it's selling methodology. You're trying to interrupt them and add value to their experience. That can be annoying at times, but in net for your business, it should drive a better outcome in terms of revenue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My a mentor of mine said that as sales professionals, we're professional interrupters. So it doesn't matter what, or at least when you're doing business development, it doesn't matter if it's chat or it's email or it's a phone call. You'll get some people who don't like the interruption.
Yeah, and I think the goal is to be as contextual and personal and add as much value as you can. But in the end, yeah, we are kind of interrupting in order to hopefully give them a better experience and also drive the business result that we're all kind of charged to drive.
Yeah.
So I'll just close here with this section on sort of where the bots fit in and just with the comment on, so again, first response time. That's just sort of the thing we really have to drill into our heads about what bots change when you introduce them. And you essentially what you see is these massive transformations in first response time, from being limited by the human beings sitting behind the keyboard, how busy they are, how well trained they are, even how the quality of their internet, if they're in a different time zone or something. And it allows you to kind of decouple from that a little bit and use automation, use bots, use intelligence to drive down that response time like crazy and increase the quality of resolution for simple, quick interactions as much as possible. Nice. And this is just an example that one of our customers had. They implemented one of our bots, and all of a sudden, 1 in 5 of their conversations are fully seamlessly resolved just automatically. So they're getting the business outcome that they want, and the customer is getting the end outcome that they want, and it's happening without a human being involved at all, and it's happening in seconds. And that's the thing I would just emphasize, is you're not dealing with a lengthy, convoluted interaction to get a mutually satisfying outcome for both parties. And that's the best possible thing that could happen. Everybody sort of wins when you introduce the right kind of automation technology and the right kind of bot.
Absolutely.
Cool. So now we'll get into some more of the tips and tricks and things like that. So we'll talk first about 5 ways to get started. Some simple things you can do just to sort of begin to play with this technology, and then some tips for some specific tips for how to implement it. So first, kind of a little bit to Anna's point a moment ago. So one of the things is that these things can be annoying when they don't feel personal or have context. They start looking like old internet pop up, pop over, pop under type stuff. And so how can you kind of combat that issue? Well, one of the ways that we've found really, really helpful that a lot of folks have embraced is using human images, GIFs, and videos as a way to make it more personal and more accommodating when somebody shows up and this thing pops up out of the corner and tries to engage them. And so at the simplest level, you can just use a picture or a GIF, and there's actually a lot of fun, humorous ways you can do those. I know of one customer who A/B tested like 75 different like funny memes until they found like the perfect meme for them. And it's like, hard to imagine doing meme A/B testing, like what world do we live in? But
yeah, sounds like a great job.
Yeah, seriously, I want that gig. Or you can do things a bit more sophisticated and custom, this is something that we've started to do, which is we actually record videos that are contextual to the page people are on and to the information we have about them. and then we load them up in there so that if somebody wants to, and we kind of subtitle them. I really recommend subtitling because obviously not everyone always uses audio. And so we have a video that they can play, and it greets them, and it gives them a little context for what we're trying to ask them to do. We subtitle it so that they can do it without sound. And then as you can see just below in this GIF, we then have a couple of sort of options that they can take. And I apologize if it's a little hard to read, but a couple of options that they can take to begin the qualification process. So intro, some context setting, and then now they start to interact with our bot to qualify themselves for whatever the next step in the journey is.
I like that. That's really cool. And it's something that I haven't personally seen too much yet, is this video idea. So I think early adopters are going to see some, definitely some cool engagement there. Cause I know I would be a guy who interacts with the video.
Early adopters seem to get like outsized wins because they're the first to deploy while it's still novel. And then they become sophisticated the fastest. So they're going to be doing all their meme tests and their video tests. Everybody else is still figuring out how even to get this chat thing on their website. So that's a really good way to kind of get a little bit of a head start on the competition.
Totally.
So even simpler, like this is generally the one I tell everybody just to start. Like, don't stress this too much, just get started. Is if you don't even have a team in place to staff it, and I know that can be a little scary, all you have to do, and Intercom makes it easy, but most chat things enable this, is you can just set it up, indicate explicitly that you're not there, and then just have it fire a simple little bot interaction to capture their email for a follow-up. And then if you happen to use Intercom, it also can pull answers from a resource library. So if they can have a quick resolution question, they can just automatically get resolution from sort of a back-end knowledge base. This one's so easy. You don't have to hire anybody. You don't have to do a bunch of technical integration. You can really just turn it on, say, if you have a question, we'll get back to you. And it allows you to start to kind of get a little sense of how interested is your audience in engaging in this way, how many leads can you start to capture, and so on. You won't get all the benefits of sort of the collapsed funnel because you're not there to talk to them and you haven't really set up a full-blown bot to go through a conversation with them. But this will get you started and just give you a little bit of a flavor for what it'll be like once this is inside your business.
Nice.
Next is sort of, if you sort of going in order of sophistication, you can build right on top of that qualification. So you put in this really simple branch tree. Anybody who's built any sort of automated kind of workflow in an email marketing tool or an SDR type tool, really simple stuff. You can just ask a couple questions and have an endpoint basically in saying, no thanks, we don't really want to do business with you, here's a video or something. Or, hey, seems like you're a really great lead, let's take the next step. And so you can start to filter out some of the noise and surface some of the business value. And this doesn't take, if the other thing takes 5 minutes to configure, this takes 2 more minutes. It really is just kind of point and click kind of branching. And the thing that you just have to know, you just kind of have to know the questions you want to ask. So that's kind of the harder part is, okay, what do I actually need to know to validate and justify that I want to talk to this person, and how do I write them and implement them here? So that's kind of probably 30 minutes with the whiteboard to make sure that you have a really good idea of kind of what's the journey and qualification path you want to use. The simple hack there is just go ask your SDRs for their qualification script and then just rewrite it into this context.
Perfect. And it would be similar to, if you've used like Pardot or Eloqua, HubSpot, Outreach, any of those similar kind of functionality.
Yeah, and you just see that it's just those metaphors, that kind of like arrow and then decision tree type like visual metaphor is so commonly used that almost every piece of software has some version of that.
Yeah.
If then statements or whatever the case may be.
Right.
So the next really valuable thing you can do is this really dramatically gives you that sort of funnel consolidation effect. It's just book demos immediately. This is where you start to see some really huge ROI start to come out of a technology like this, because demos are typically what you're is going to be either what you actually compensate or the sort of the leading indicator compensation metric for your SDR teams. It's kind of, if you have the right lead, you can go right to your account executives or your more senior salespeople for the kind of the right accounts if they've come through. This is a little more complex to implement, not so much because it takes a lot of work in the tools. What's a bit harder about this is your business actually has to have adopted centralized calendaring. And not every company, even though like for the very, very technologically aggressive businesses, that's pretty standard. What I find is when I have a lot of conversations with companies, they haven't all fully deployed all this stuff. And so one thing you need to do is make sure that you have a calendar to put all this information in. If you have that in place, the config on this is easy. If you don't yet, it's going to take a little work with your sales teams and your SDR teams to create the process so that the calendars are accurate, they actually follow up on these meetings, they go in there prepared with their pre-call plan and all that good stuff.
Yeah. And can you take that, like, can you have the layer of complexity where, let's say, I have in my CRM, all these different lead owners of all my different reps. And could if a visitor comes back and it's owned by rep A, can rep A pop up as opposed to someone else? Yeah.
Yes, you totally can do that.
Wow.
Not all, again, I'm always trying to speak about this, not just from the Intercom perspective, from like chat.
Yeah.
I would love it for everyone to become an Intercom customer, but I know not everyone will. So you can with Intercom. I know you can with a lot of other technologies, but that's not universally the case.
Okay.
Just something, it's definitely something to take a look at, is that, do you have that sort of Salesforce or other CRM integration so that you can kind of have a more customized meeting booking experience?
Totally. Yeah. Because from running teams, I know that piece would be definitely important. So you don't have anyone squabbling over who's getting the time on the calendar. That's cool though. Powerful stuff.
Mm-hmm. And then I would say the most sophisticated, and the example we've got sort of set up in this little GIF here is actually transacting right in Messenger, like running a credit card to buy something. There's another version of this if you're more B2B and more face-to-face kind of sellers, where you can end with launching an actual hangout to sell to them right then. And this is probably the most sophisticated move, which is you have the bot drive a whole interaction and then either pass it to a human or pass it to a transactional experience to actually. And that's, a really kind of mind-blowing idea. What if you took that whole big long funnel and instead of just collapsing the top 3 or 4 steps, collapse all of them? Do the whole interaction from visit to sale inside of a messenger during a web session. And that's actually completely possible. It's not some crazy weird, if this configuration of that, whatever. It's actually fairly straightforward. You just kind of have to have the sophistication as a business to be able to pull it off. So the Intercom Messenger, for example, works really well with Stripe. So that's one way. And others, we have a bunch of integrations with Google Hangouts and I think Zoom and a few other conferencing softwares. So if it's more, you just click and now you're running your demo process right then and there. And hopefully you can see it.
Yeah. That's super interesting because there's been times definitely in my career when I have done all of my homework on my own and I know the solution or the tech that I want to go buy, and I will go and I would, back then fill out a form, yada, yada. And you're basically forced to go through this like 3-4 week sales process. And it was like, I was like, no, like I'm good to go. And they still have to push me through this funnel, whereas this, just strips that all away.
Yeah, there's nothing more frustrating than showing up with like a check and not having anyone. Like, can you?
Wild.
And so that's one of the really exciting things that we're starting to see this evolution of the messenger is the website and all the other interactions have done a good enough job of convincing somebody and getting them to that place. Yeah. Bring them all the way to the end of the thing. Take the check and move on with your life, and everyone can leave happy. And I think we're starting to get there. Some of our customers are doing this. It's kind of like, I would say, kind of the bleeding edge of what's possible in chat right now. But it's very possible. And I think it's helpful to imagine a world where your teams can do this, and your website can do this, because I think it's going to be pretty common in a year or two for sure.
Totally. And quickly, you mentioned something there, kind of the difference between B2B and B2C, right? Like some of these, if you're selling complex software, you're probably going to have to at least jump on, a Zoom or Google Hangout and walk through it because it's complex. B2C, maybe not so much. And so Carl Schaefer actually asked a great question. So Carl, thanks for the question. And that's, how does the experience change when you split it out from B2B to B2C?
Totally. So I think actually it's funny. That's a very simple question, but actually there's a lot of complexity in how to answer it. So I'll try to do it simply, and please interrupt me if this goes off the rails.
Sounds good.
So I think what happens a lot in a B2C business is you tend to be dealing with not necessarily a transactional purchase, because buying a car is not a simple purchase, but is a B2C interaction. But what you do find is that you have a lot of inconsistency with B2C businesses about, do they have a sales team? Oftentimes they don't. They have a support team. Do they have SDRs? No, not really. That's not really the right concept for them. And so what you find instead is that you end up doing a lot more things like you're trying to get previous purchasers to buy again. You're trying to drive repurchase loyalty. You're trying to mitigate returns by having good interactions with people. You're trying to upsell when people have questions. Is this available in my size? Yes or no? You see a lot of is folks saying right in the messenger, and the bots are really good at answering questions like this, is, hey, when is my package going to arrive? Like, why would you have a human being deal with that? You should just have the bot answer that question.
Yeah.
So it tends to be a lot of things that are sort of a little bit more support oriented, a little more just like answering lingering questions about a purchase, and a lot of effort to reactivate previous purchasers when they come back to the site, like shopping carts, remarketing, and things like that. And what I find can be challenging for B2C is two things. Sometimes they don't have a CRM, so it's hard to have a lot of data. So the data part gets tricky. Intercom has some capabilities of similar CRM, so it can help a bit. And then I think the other thing is there's not necessarily a team in place to work the chat. So that's where you have to kind of partner much more closely with what would typically be support to deal with the kinds of conversations that can't be resolved by a bot.
Right.
The B side, I would say teams are a little bit better staffed to deal with this, and they have better concepts. Not better, but they just have more sophisticated concepts for how you think about these things. They have a whole team, typically a whole SDR team, whose only job is to deal with sort of like maybe flaky, not qualified buyers and turn those into good meetings for others. And there's not really an equivalent thing in B2C. And so in B2B, what you find is that you end up really anchoring on using SDR teams to sort of be the front line of defense. And then even ahead of them, you use the bot as their front line of defense. So bots filter away as much noise as we can, send customers to support, get rid of just kind of looky-loos that aren't going to buy. And then the SDR team sit behind them, and then the more strategic sellers sit behind them. And that's kind of the dynamic you see a lot in B2B. I don't think there's anything right or wrong with either of those. It's just to say that I think chat has a role to play in both, but the organizational and the kind of the business concepts are really different on either side of it.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Hopefully that wasn't too complicated of an answer.
No, it made total sense.
Cool. So I figured we'd close with a few tips and then open it up for any questions that are left.
Sweet.
So first, kind of related to what I was just saying. So who's in charge of this thing? Very common question. Should sales be putting it up? Should support be putting it up? Should marketing be putting it up? It's a really hard question to answer, again, because of that B2C, B2B dynamic, and also because internally to a business, you get sort of different areas of sophistication. And so the first thing we always say is just like, who's in charge of making money? That sure is often the person who's going to drive this conversation, because they're often the one who's going to say, people have stopped responding to our team's emails. We're really struggling to get in good interactions with our prospects and our buyers. And so they're often going to be the one that says, we need to take advantage of this new channel. We need to innovate a little bit and sort of embrace this new area. With that said, it takes certain skills and resources to do this well. There's a certain marketing set of skills that are very digital in nature. There's a certain human set of skills for the conversations that can't be resolved by bots that tend to be more sales and support oriented. So what we often see is that there's a driver, usually in sales or marketing, who really wants this technology. And then what we see is that there's sort of like a matrix group of people that are aligned to supporting it because it either benefits their metrics or they're willing to just support because they're excited by the innovation. So I would generally say that that's kind of how it looks. For example, here at Intercom, our sales team owns the actual usage of our messenger and Intercom, but the marketing team, my team, takes a huge amount of responsibility and drives kind of the more like website optimization aspects of it. And we have a really close partnership. And I think that as businesses get more sophisticated, you'll see that more and more.
Cool.
So we talked a little bit earlier about context. This is really critical. So what you really want to think about is to whom do you want to show messages and where do you want to put them? A very common mistake is you put this on everywhere on your website on day one. It overwhelms. You don't get a lot of value because there's a lot of noise, and you shut the thing down. And you kind of have a failed pilot, and it takes a while to get sort of re-engaged. And so it's really helpful to start with, okay, what are the highest value places in a purchase path and a journey toward engaging with us? And what are the highest value audiences that no matter where they are on the website, we want to intervene and talk to them, and then deploy the messenger appropriately. If you use bots, you can be much more aggressive with where you put it versus less. But even in that case, to kind of Anna's question earlier, it's not always right to interrupt every single aspect of your website with pop-ins and messages and things like that. Sometimes you just want somebody to sit there and read the landing page and learn something. And then, so we use timers for when to pop things up, give 10 seconds on a given page. We use IP address criteria, all kinds of things. And it's just really critical to use all the context you have available, so as you avoid over messaging your audience and also inundating your internal teams with things of maybe not great value. A really great tip that we've experienced is initially we often would sort of kind of come in all guns blazing with like crazy complex questions and fancy stuff. And what we discovered is simple and casual tends to outperform other things. That's where that meme example, a short video, or just a simple friendly question that's a little bit generic can really help. And also if you put a little personalization into your simple friendly question, that can be useful too. But just kind of give people a chance to sort of say what they want to say. So kind of, you kind of want a friendly message to say, hey, we're here. Yeah. What they're going to say, and then let the bot take them through a path based on whatever that message was, or have your team intervene and sort of address the question.
Yeah, that makes total sense and is in line with, simple sales methodology. And, if you're asking your friend for something, a favor, you need to borrow his truck when you're moving, you're not typically just going to lead with that. You'll probably say, hey, what's up, man? How's your day going? And then get there. Exactly. Gotta ease into it.
Yeah, ease into the more aggressive, more revenue-oriented conversation.
Yeah.
Give the people a chance to kind of drive as well, because the bot can be really powerful in that case, because they can find their way to an answer a lot of times without you intervening.
Mm-hmm.
I already shared this one. I jumped ahead of myself, but this is what I was talking about being really careful about who you show things to around your ICP, your ideal customer profile.
Yeah.
And then lastly, this is one that we've found just like hugely impactful, is use other technologies that you have in your stack in combination with this new tech. So just like when you think about your Salesforce instance or other CRM and your marketing automation, people do interesting things. They use enrichment. They use other tech to kind of facilitate and drive that process forward. It's really helpful to integrate other technology into these workflows. So whether it's posting information into your marketing automation so that lead scores change properly, whether it's triggering activities in, say, Slack, so you get the right AE to jump into chat, who otherwise would be doing a different task. We partner with a great company called Troops AI that does that, and they have a great product for that kind of Slack triggering.
Troops is awesome.
Yeah, and they have a great use case around using messaging as well. They've gotten a lot of benefit out of really embracing this on their website. So nice. Yeah, it's a great product. You can do things like, as I mentioned, fire off a video conference, depending on what you're using for video conferencing. You can use article search. That's where you sort of have like kind of certain questions that everyone always asks and they're already there. So you can just dispense with really easy, simple questions quite quickly. So the point is to say that like this shouldn't exist in a vacuum, and it's actually kind of a problem if it does, because then you get this weird side channel that isn't measured properly, doesn't tie to any of your core systems, feels kind of like a chore for your teams to interact with because it's not part of their day-to-day. So it's really helpful to use other tech inside of this to make it seamless, or as seamless as possible with everything else you're doing.
Nice.
And then I guess, so just wrapping up, just to kind of sum up everything here, I guess what I would say is if you agree that messaging and chat is sort of eating the way that people interact with each other and that businesses need to catch up, then I would suggest taking a hard look at chat and messaging. And if you find, which most companies will, that you can't actually staff in those channels at a level where your first response time is where you'd like it to be, if you were really, really getting and intervening with people, probably your next thing you're going to want to look at is automation and chat. And then the last thing I would say is what you want to think about in the context of all that automation and chat is how do you still create a personal human style experience to the best you can, not to fake like it's a person when it's actually a robot, but rather to create the best possible, fastest, most seamless experience that's hopefully even kind of fun for people that kind of chat can create. And so if you kind of work through that journey, in my opinion, it's sort of inevitable that most of the listeners and viewers on this webinar, as well as in general, most of our interactions with companies are going to start to get more and more mediated through this channel. And I actually think that's a good thing. People get help faster, people get questions faster, businesses are more efficient. I kind of think everybody wins. This is one of those no-brainer things where we're going to wonder where this was 10 years from now, because we won't really be able to imagine interacting with companies any other way.
Yeah, totally. And you get to have baby Groot gifts over there. So that's definitely a win-win.
Again, the meme testing job is the job I think we all need to try and get.
Yeah, the director of meme testing. We'll see that job title come out in the next few years. All right, Brian, that was awesome, man. Tons of takeaways there, and we have so many questions. So this is obviously something that people are very, very interested, want to know more, and it's top of mind for people. So we got 10 minutes. I'm going to just start firing them if you're open. All right. Let's go here. Here's one that's should be a quick answer here. Tom wants to know what tools are available for designing bot flows and what role in a company uses those tools. So we went over what role, but Intercom is available for designing bot flows.
Yeah, totally. But I also would say a marker and a whiteboard is available for designing bot flows. I think I learned from an old mentor this expression, win on paper, which I think is really valuable. Jumping right into a piece of tech, especially something that's new that you're just deploying for the first time and starting to configure and play with it is always really fun. I mean, honestly, who reads the instructions on their new phone or their new stereo or whatever? But for something like this, like I said, if you think about what your normal business process is for dealing with an inbound email or a form submission or whatever, and you kind of just sit with the whiteboard for an hour and plot out kind of what is the pathing you want to have, and how can an endpoint in a Stripe application or a support query or a meeting schedule, do that on a whiteboard first. Save yourself the heartache of having to change things constantly in the app, and then go into a tool like Intercom, and it's really easy. It's kind of if this, then that statements, then kind of import that logic right into the technology, and it'll kind of just work. So I think this is just one of those times where, maybe do read the instructions and spend a little time thinking it through. But simple as that. Also, some of our customers use things such as like, what's that, like process design software? It's like, starts with an L. It's like, you can make like workflows and things really easily.
I know what you're talking about. It's escaping me right now, though.
As soon as we stop thinking about it, but
yeah,
PowerPoint, you can do it wherever. It's helpful to think about these things as processes, not as just like throwing bots and automation at a website or whatever, without kind of consideration for where it fits with everything.
Yeah. Are you thinking of Lucid Chart? Is that the one? Yeah, there you go. Lucid Chart's awesome too. Good people over there. So all right, so we got another one, very tactical. So Brad, thanks for the question. So Brad's organization, they have users that are very small shops, 1 to 2 employees, and then they deal with large organizations as well, 500 plus. And Brad says, I think the chatbots would be more useful for some of the smaller prospects, and the larger prospects might expect more personalization, and wants to get your thoughts on that.
I don't think this is an either or situation. I think there's a role for both, but we should be really conscious that human beings are still necessary and are a critical part of sort of successful selling. So I think on the small side, the unit economics of talking to all those people may not work. It's Brad, right? May not work for Brad's business. It's hard to imagine him having an expensive person selling to 1 or 2 person shops that will scale very well. So I think makes sense to say either based on a previous visit cookie or based on how they answer a question, send them into a video demo, which could pop right inside of the browser, send them into a purchase experience or a pricing config experience that could pop up right inside there, potentially. So I think for those smaller ones, the goal would be to detect who they are and give them a thoughtful flow for it. And then for the bigger ones, he's probably right. They're not going to close the deal. You could send a DocuSign through the messenger. But for a $1 million deal, for a $500K deal or whatever, even for more than a few $1,000s, what are the odds you're going to send a DocuSign and just get everything taken care of? So I think in that case, that's where you would probably see it quickly move to a meeting scheduling motion or a screen share motion, either of which I think is okay. It's just we shouldn't assume that those two things are equivalent and that you would treat them the same. So that's kind of how I would think about it, Brad.
Yeah. Makes total sense. And also, it depends not only just on the business size, but like the person that you're interacting with on the other side. We all have certain channels that we lean towards. Some people might love to interact through chat. People might love social. People might love email. So you got to meet them on their terms and where they want to buy as well.
Totally.
All right. So Carrie Costa has a question. Carrie, thanks for your question. It seems that the book a demo function that we spoke with on your AE's calendar may replace the SDR function. Can you help me understand how the SDR role is incorporated into the chatbot process?
Sure. So I guess account-based thinking is a useful metaphor here, although it's not perfect. But it's like, okay, if you've been trying to break into sort of one of your key accounts for 12 months and that person shows up on your website and lo and behold, they want to talk to somebody, it may or may not make sense to run them through the SDR process to get access to your AE. If you could, you might want that AE just to jump right into the chat And if you can't pull that off, maybe instead you you have the meeting get scheduled directly with that person, so that you're minimizing the number of new faces and people without context that are now touching a critical account or a critical group. However, there's still qualification still has to happen and discovery still has to happen. And in a lot of businesses, that's not the best use of an AE's time, especially let's say if you're working on a quarterly cadence at the end of a quarter, where maybe their time is better spent on closing business. And so I think there are, for sure, let's not make any bones about it. There are aspects of the SDR role that I think start to get eaten by automation in general, not just by messaging, by just automation in general, especially by the ability to do some light qualification and scheduling right inside the messenger. But I think the best SDRs do a lot more than book meetings. I think the best SDRs I've ever worked with or helped train or been sold, have sold to me, they're doing a whole lot more than just getting my attention and finding 15 minutes on my calendar. They're setting expectations, they're doing some light discovery, they're figuring out if it's even worth the time of somebody further internally. And the goal here would be to give your best SDRs as much time to do that as possible, and less time sort of just chasing email threads to see, oh, you're available on Thursday. Well, my AE just got the flu and his kid's sick and now it's on Wednesday and all that nonsense. Let's make that a problem of the past and focus the SDR team's times on the high value action.
Yeah, definitely. And I've heard many times, you can, when you do automate, automate to personalize. It's interesting. When you automate more functions, it's going to allow your reps to spend more time personalizing on the high impact activities.
Yeah, it's like time shifting into the useful stuff instead of the lower impact stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Alyssa Goldschmidt, we probably have time for one, maybe two more questions here. Alyssa, thanks for your question. What do you think the launch and onboarding time for setting up chatbots typically would be?
It's not too bad. Again, I can only speak to Intercom, but I would say if once a company decides we're doing this, getting it on their website is no harder than adding a script. So it's if you've implemented Google Analytics, which doesn't take long at all, you can have Intercom sort of running on your site and aware of visitors and stuff. So if you have one of your web team available, less than a day to get the tech in place. And then as far as configuring bots and things, that's sort of that whiteboarding session I talked about, and then building the bots out. So I think if this is all you were doing and you were just really focused, you could kind of go from I want a bot to having bots live on your website in a couple of days. I will say there's probably a little bit more work, as with any technology, on training your SDRs on what to do when sort of a conversation finds its way to them live and things like that. But I'd also say this is kind of one of the fun parts of the SDR job in some ways. So I find that sometimes the most high attaining, high achievement folks are eager to try a new channel. And what I've done in the past is I've had the most sort of the A players help build out all the practices of the channel. So I sort of throw whatever A player SDR that's the most comfortable with ambiguity. I would say, get this thing on the website, turn on the bot, throw that person at the thing and say, hey, write down whatever works and we'll use that to train the next ones. And you could be sort of live with this and making money from it, I would say very quickly.
I love it. That's awesome. That's a good strategy too. Put the hungry people on it and kind of let them go through it, break a few things, and then just iterate and make it better. I love it. All right, last question. And sorry if we didn't get to your question. Brian, where can people reach out to you? Email, LinkedIn? What's the best way?
I guess either's fine. LinkedIn's probably the easiest because it's a sales community. We're all on there anyway. So you'll just find me on LinkedIn at Brian Kotlyar. I'll try and answer if I can. Also, perfect. Twitter. I guess I should have put this on a slide, but you can find me there too at @bkotlyar. And if you want to email me, it's just my first dot my last name at intercom.io. And I'll answer any. I'm sure Scott will be able to share sort of the question log. So we'll try and kind of one-offs to everybody who we didn't answer. But if you have any follow-ups, please just find me on the internet somewhere. Perfect. And all right, I'm going to squeeze one more in there before I let you go. All right. So Rebecca, Rebecca, thanks for your question. This is a very specific one to her industry. Do you think that chatbots could help in the health industry to make those first conversations with a more sensitive market where anonymity matters? I do think so. I think the first, of course, caveat is that HIPAA compliance, medical issues, you've got to really think about that. And I'm by no remote means capable of commenting there. But I will say, I think in concept, there's actually a very strong application. because if you just think about how many sort of routine queries happen each day, like simple things, like let's just start with basic like logistics. How do I schedule an appointment? How do I cancel an appointment? When is my appointment? Let's take all that off the table. Then add on top of that simple questions, maybe about like common illnesses or things like that. If that exists in a knowledge base somewhere, like we have a product for that, but you can plug into others. The bots can actually go look at the words that you're using in your question, reference the knowledge base, and surface the likely answer. And then the person say, this answered my question or didn't, and so on and so forth. I've actually used this with some customers of ours that use Intercom, and it's like magic. It's like, how does this machine understand what I need and then just give me the answer? And like what should have been an hour interaction with the support rep has now been 12 seconds. It's really cool. Yeah. So I can think that would really play a role too. Again, acknowledge some legal concerns that may need to be addressed. And then the other benefit, again, I'll say is, okay, what if you took all the questions about meeting logistics and appointments and stuff off the table? You took all the basic routine symptoms questions with a knowledge base. All you were left with were really interesting, thoughtful, hard to answer questions. Well, now have your well-trained, thoughtful nurses or whomever answer that stuff in a sensitive, personalized, careful way. And they have the bandwidth to do it because they're not dealing with the noise. So I think that's kind of the way I would kind of think through that concept.
That makes sense. Awesome. And that is our time. Brian, thank you so much for all your insight. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. And thanks we got through quite a few questions. That was awesome. So thanks again. And thank you everyone who joined us and stayed till the end. We'll be shooting out the sales handbook your way.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for your questions. Take care.